So nitrogen is the most abundant gas in the atmosphere, but living organisms are unable to use it directly. It's a very stable molecule. However, it's an incredibly important element that forms some really important molecules in living things. Don't know what's happened to the slide here. So here are some examples of why the nitrogen cycle is important, why we're talking about the nitrogen cycle. So nitrogen forms is part of amino acids, and as a result proteins. It's part of nucleotides, as a result nucleic acids like DNA and RNA. It's a component of ATP, and it's also needed for two molecules, NAD and NADP. So NAD for respiration, NADP for photosynthesis. So incredibly important element. Without it, we couldn't survive. So we need to look at how nitrogen can be taken up by plants. So that'd be through active transport from the soil. So the nitrogen's in the form of nitrates at this point. And simply, how do animals get the source of nitrogen? By consuming the organic biological molecules which contain nitrogen, like the proteins, digest it, absorb it, and then that can be incorporated into an animal's own biological molecules. Bacteria play a role in each of these four stages, and you need to know the names of the general groups of bacteria, not specific names, and what they do, how they work in these four processes. So we'll talk about these five molecules as we go through. So nitrogen gas, ammonia, ammonium ions, nitrates and nitrites. So here's a general nitrogen cycle. I'm going to break it down into different parts as we go through. So just to quickly go through what we've got atmospheric nitrogen. We've then got the living part of the ecosystem, so here. We've then got the non-living part of the ecosystem here, and we've got again nitrogen in the atmosphere. And first step we're going to talk about is nitrogen fixation, so going from atmospheric nitrogen into nitrogen. So here's a quick summary, so written down. I'll go through it in the diagram as well in a second. So we've got four ways that nitrogen gas can be converted to nitrogen containing compounds. First of all, we've got free living nitrogen fixing bacteria. So these nitrogen fixing bacteria can convert nitrogen gas to ammonia, and so they're reducing nitrogen. And also you can have nitrogen fixing bacteria that forms mutualistic relationship with plants, and these bacteria can be found in things like root nodules of legumes. Again, so they reduce nitrogen to ammonia, so fixing it into ammonium. There are two other ways. There's lightning, which can convert some nitrogen gas to ammonia, and there's the Haber process, which can produce ammonium nitrate, which can be used as a fertilizer. So here are some root nodules containing mutualistic rhizobium bacteria in peas, and the same in the root nodules found in clover. So that process was representing nitrogen fixation, nitrogen gas to ammonia, and this arrow is representing mutualistic bacteria, nitrogen fixing bacteria like rhizobium found in root nodules. You can also have free living nitrogen fixing bacteria that convert nitrogen gas into ammonia, which then goes into the soil. So that's another way of fixing nitrogen gas. So we've now got, now the plants have got the ammonia from the bacteria. So they've got a source of nitrogen that they can use to build their own proteins, their own DNA, etc. Animals may eat those plants, and in doing so, the animals then get their source of nitrogen to build their own proteins, DNA, etc. Animals could excrete waste, for example urea, which contains nitrogen, or the animals or plants could die, which is why we've got these two arrows down here representing death. In those dead organisms or feces, you've got nitrogen containing compounds. The next step we're going to look at is this ammonification. So ammonification is where saprobiotic bacteria decomposes, release extracellular enzymes, so enzymes that are secreted outside of them. They then hydrolyze the biological molecules and release ammonia, which dissolves into ammonium ions, into the soil. The nitrogens then enter the non-living component of the, and you can see that on this diagram here. So we're representing this point here, so the nitrogen-containing compounds like proteins in dead organisms. The bacteria, the saprobiotic bacteria, release extracellular enzymes. Ammonia is released. It dissolves to form ammonium ions in the soil. The next step we're going to look at is nitrification, which actually occurs in two parts. It's really important you stress the two parts. So the next step is nitrification, carried out by nitrifying bacteria. Again, it's really important you know the names of the types of bacteria that carry out each stage. It's a two-part stage process, and you need both to gain the mark. You can't just go from ammonia all the way to nitrates. So it's ammonia to nitrites, and the second stage is nitrites to nitrates. Both are oxidation reactions, both require the presence of oxygen in the soil, both carried out by nitrifying bacteria. So that's represented in this diagram here. So we've got nitrification of ammonia to nitrites by nitrifying bacteria, and we've got nitrification of nitrites to nitrates, again by nitrifying bacteria. The nitrates are then in a form that the plants can then absorb by active transport. So nitrates are incredibly important, and if you apply fertiliser, it will be in the form of nitrates that you put in the soil, the mineral. It can be the form that can be absorbed by plant roots. There is another step which can occur to complete the cycle, going back into nitrogen in the air. So we've gone all the way so far around here, from nitrogen back into the air, and that's denitrification. Denitrification occurs in anaerobic conditions, and it's carried out by denitrifying bacteria. Questions are often related to increasing the yield of crops and farming and agriculture. So plants need nitrates to make protein so they can grow. So the concentration of nitrates is important to remain fairly high, so that plants have got enough nitrates to make their own proteins and create a large yield of crops. There are two processes or two things that can happen, which means that denitrification rates are higher and also that nitrification rates are lower. So if denitrification rates are high, that means that any nitrates that are formed are becoming nitrogen gas. They're not becoming available for the plant, so that's lowering the concentration of nitrates. And also there are things that can occur which reduces the rate of nitrification, so the nitrates are not being made as quickly, again lowering the concentration of nitrates in the soil. The first one is ploughing. Ploughing a field will create air pockets, air spaces in the soil, providing oxygen. Oxygen is absolutely vital for nitrification, so that increases the concentration of nitrates being made. A bonus is that it discourages denitrification, because denitrifying bacteria are anaerobic, so there'll be less denitrification as well, so less nitrates being converted to nitrogen gas. Both of those results in higher concentration of nitrates in the soil. More can be taken up by a plant, and plants can make more proteins, so you're going to have a higher yield, which is going to mean more profit for the farmer. Also, farmers try and avoid waterlogged soil. So if you look at the two pictures here, water, if it gets in between the soil particles, displaces the air. So here we've got lots of air surrounding in the soil particles. When the water moves in, the air is forced out, it's displaced out. Again, that's going to create anaerobic conditions, going to increase denitrification, so the concentration of nitrates is getting lowered, nitrates are being used up, being converted to nitrogen gas, and also the rate that they're being made, the nitrates, because nitrification is happening at a slower rate. So there's less nitrates in the soil, less can be absorbed by plants, less proteins can be made, you have a lower yield.